Feed. Written and narrated by Dr. Bob. Dale woke up starving again. The bedroom was nearly pitch black. Only moonlight illuminated the curtain across the room from him. He clutched his belly tightly and drew up in the customary fetal position. The pangs hadn't started yet, but the whirling sensation in his gut had. The first jolt of pain ran through his belly like abdominal muscles cramping post-workout. He rolled over the edge of the bed and desperately ran his hand around the floor, hoping to find anything. There were empty candy boxes and energy bar wrappers sprawled around the bed. One by one, Dale put them to his mouth to shake out some crumbs. Many of those wrappers, however, were licked clean, some twice over. He knew he couldn't hold off going to the kitchen now. This was a struggle for him, as each attack left him progressively weaker. He pulled the comforter off his body. The cold air chilled his sweat-covered thermals and sheets. Dragging his feet over the side of the bed, he rose to a hunched stance and shuffled on wobbly legs out of his bedroom. Dale turned his head to the light switch right at the doorway, throwing him a little off balance. After flicking it on, he walked to the refrigerator, his aching eyes squinting while they adjusted to the brightness. He opened the freezer door first and started rummaging around for anything to eat. He saw a couple bags of chicken soup, which he nonchalantly tossed to the floor. He steadied himself while clutching his burning stomach. Next came the mixed vegetables, practically mocking him. A bag of broccoli, mutton chops, hamburger. He gathered up everything in the freezer, yelled, and threw it all to the floor. Feeling spent after his tantrum, he lowered his head and stared at the refrigerator door. Dale opened it to find a bottle of water, some mustard, and the remains of glazed ham. The ham was picked and scraped clean of all its glaze and candied pineapples. He sank to the floor, knees crossed, and pulled the ham from the refrigerator. He sat it in his lap, turned it around and upside down, looking for a patch he might have overlooked in his haste. Sugar was the only thing he knew that could satisfy the hunger and belly aches, but there were no more sweets. The last time he failed to find something good, the pain caused him to gnaw a hole in the tip of his tongue. He looked at the ham and thought of how sweet it tasted. He closed his eyes, licking it with the sore and perforated tip of his tongue, willing himself to think past all the savory and salty notes so he could concentrate on the sweetness. He begged his gut like a worshiper pleading for a god to accept his substandard offering. He cautiously nibbled the ham like a mouse and swallowed. 1 bite, 2 bites, 3 bites, and his belly did not protest. The taste of the cold meat was better than anything his nutrient-starved body had eaten in days. He took bigger chunks, and then an electrifying pain ran through his belly. The vomit shot from his mouth as his angered stomach violently clenched, rejecting his offering. The pain quickly spread from his belly out to the rest of his body and engulfed him as if it were the only reality he'd ever known. Dale didn't hear his own screams, or notice the pain of his failing heart trying to grab for his attention. He didn't feel individual limbs either. The pain united every part of his body into a singular throbbing mass of hurt, and then darkness. Melting snow sloughed off the cabin's windows, letting through the morning sunlight. Dale's expired body laid rigid on the kitchen floor since the previous night. His bloodshot eyes stared up at the ceiling with a look of shock, jaw slacked in a permanent silent wail. Several wiggling shapes moved from in between his buttocks. Radiating outwards, the things made their way down his legs. Cold, fresh air seeping from under the kitchen door drew the worms outside. Their slicked-over forms undulated and wiggled, casting off the remaining specks of fecal matter and blood they had been caked in after being birthed from Dale's rectum. When they hit the snow, their chilled bodies picked up in speed, switching from slow, inching movements to quick snake-like ones. mountains. Tall, dark brown trees stood out in the powdery white background as the worms raced their way towards them. As the worms drew nearer to the trees, they quickened their pace even further. Their then warm bodies melting the snow left pencil-thin, S-curved trails behind them. The first one that reached the tree corkscrewed its way up and around the trunk, pausing when it reached the base of the first limb it came to. It crawled out on the limb until instinct stopped it. From there, it hooked its tail over the edge of the branch and lowered the rest of its body to dangle. While the rest of its kin were still winding their way up the trees, its body started to violently shake like a limp spaghetti noodle. Bright red bands started to form down the length of its sickly white body. Pinhead-sized pores opened up and released a clear honey-like fluid. Within minutes, the worm was dead, and the substance it was coated in was hardening in the cool air. Dale's old friend Matt arrived from town a day later to check up on him. He attempted to meet him 3 days before, but the snowstorm halted travel to many areas and made communication spotty at best. The salt trucks had just cleared enough of the main road to allow Matt to traverse the remaining distance to Dale's cabin. Even then, he had to leave his truck parked on the side of the road to hike the remaining half-mile to his friend's vacation home. The path leading there was only large enough to fit a snowmobile. A couple of young maples lined the property around the cabin. The bare branches contrasted with the pine trees that surrounded Matt on his trek there. From the corner of his eye, they caught his attention. He grabbed one from off a low-hanging maple branch. Candy cane. Matt chuckled. In addition to his love of solitude, Dale enjoyed a Spartan environment on vacation. It gave him a sense of being an outdoorsman, no distractions between him and nature. So the irony wasn't lost on Matt that his rugged friend would cover the trees in something so crass and commercial as Christmas decor. He stared at the candy cane's banded instead of striped red and white colors and felt the odd bumpy texture. Matt chuckled again. But at the thought of his friend making an exception for anything sold in an LL Bean catalog. Man canes, Matt laughed. Hewn and hand-sculpted by the rusty axe of a lumberjack living an austere existence in the wilds of Alaska, venturing to a remote trading outpost once a year on a moose-drawn sleigh. Matt lifted the cane and took a bite. The candy cane was sweet and minty, but with a hint of pine. Like the pine needle tea Dale drank religiously. He also noticed the candy cane wasn't completely hard. It had a soft and chewy, but not unpleasant center. He grabbed a couple more from the tree for himself and his son. Matt walked the rest of the way to the cabin, sorting through his keychain for the front and back spares. He pulled out the spare for the front door and stuck it in the lock. Dale hadn't greeted him, so Matt knew he hadn't seen him approach. The prankster in Matt couldn't resist the opportunity to catch Dale off guard and scare him senseless. He clicked the lock and entered.